The release of a new generation of video game console should be a time for gamers and consumers of the art form to rejoice. As new platforms and hardware take over existing incumbents, not only is competition reignited, but new advances in technology are presented to the public. Better graphics, quicker loading times, faster online play, you name it. The birth of a new generation of hardware brings with it excitement and promises the next level of home or on-the-go entertainment. Sony has been at the head of many of these revolutions with their home console line, the PlayStation. Ever since the release of the PS1 in 1995 in North America, the Japanese conglomerate has sought to drive the market and wrestle consumers from incumbents like Sega and Nintendo during the 90s and early 2000s. It has done so by providing a thriving ecosystem of third-party developers aligned with its release strategy, as well as continuously solid first-party titles that made, more often than not, drive the purchase of the hardware in the early months after the release of a new console, from the Soulsborne and God of War series to Horizon Zero Dawn or Kingdom Hearts. But this was not the case in late 2020, when the new hardware generation of the Japanese juggernaut was released to a worldwide audience. The PS5 promised the world to its gamer base. 4K resolution, up to 120 FPS, backward compatibility with the large majority of PS4 games. In the world of an aging Nintendo Switch and disappointing Xbox catalog, the release of this new console was going to establish Sony as the potential leader for the next decade in the industry. However, this is not what happened. A myriad of factors limited the supply of the new console, and many consumers were left empty-handed, hoping to the supply chain gods for their new console. Today, we will look at why you probably don't yet have a PS5. So welcome to Rebel Economics, where we talk about interesting topics in business, economics, finance, etc. If you enjoy our content, we would ask you to please hit the like button and subscribe. We would like to get as close as we can to 100 subscribers by the end of the year, and each of you can help in making that dream a reality. But without further ado, let's go back to the video. 2020 was a tough year, there is no doubt about that. The raging pandemic brought chaos into the world, bringing many countries to close their borders, quarantine their population, and limiting the economic activity of a myriad of sectors. But for the video game industry, that is another question entirely. Sales of incumbent consoles rose dramatically during the early months of home seclusion, with the Nintendo Switch seeing an uptick in sales equivalent to the early months after its launch way back in 2017. That was the time when I personally got one. As the reality became more apparent about the coming months that turned out to be years of confinement, having a console at home to help pass the time became less of an unnecessary expenditure and more like an investment in my sanity. This effect of confinement consumption spilled over to other entertainment-related industries, from streaming to board games. The world outside our closed windows was tough, and retreating to fantasy worlds and time black holes like games of Risk or Pokemon, I am sure has saved many from the worst of the confinement anxiety. In other words, for Sony, there has not been a better time to release the new console. The PS5 made it to the market in a peak of what economists call demand inelasticity. The concept of demand inelasticity is generally used to represent how the demand for a good changes after a change in prices. For example, a good for which the changes in prices don't affect the demand, like utilities or prescription drugs, are considered inelastic. Whereas when demand is sensitive to prices, and it rises and falls in an inverse relationship to the price of the good, that is considered elastic. In many ways, elasticity is related with competition and the ability of customers to switch to competitors of industries that raise their prices, or the need that they have for the product. An example of a price inelastic item during 2020 was toilet paper. The need for it is obvious, so demand is guaranteed, but the second supply was compromised by people stockpiling a ton of them. Toilet paper was sold at an extreme premium online. I talked about how the confinement drove consumption of entertainment-related products up, which in itself made the PS5 a more desirable product than what Sony had anticipated. The results of such a combination are history. At this point, three things happened that generated the perfect storm for a price inelastic good, to cause millions of would-be consumers to be left empty-handed. First, all the aforementioned reasons caused the launch of the PS5 to be the biggest launch of any PlayStation console ever, even surpassing the PS4 2.1 million units in its first 2 weeks in 2013. Japan was rocked by the release of the new console, with 103,900 standard copies and 14,181 digital editions sold, for a combined total of 118,082 consoles. The circumstances were ripe for such an increased demand, and so Sony made sure to capitalize on such an eager market hungry for entertainment. Second, the flip side to increased demand in every case of supply collapse is always an external factor that limits supply. This might be an underestimation of the demand by the producers or an unexpected effect delaying the manufacturing of a given product. In the case of the PS5, it was the second. The currently still ongoing microprocessor shortage was in part responsible for compromising the production of the PS5, making it unable to keep up with the rising demand. Once the stocked supplies Sony had prepared for the world market ran out, they were unable to restock successfully. This global microprocessor supply collapse was due in part to the same reasons that affected global trade. Essentially, the same problems suffered by Sony, but only at a different stage. Increased demand for electronics, collapse of supply routes, lack of labor due to the virus, and the whole breaking down of a very integrated industry led many producers, primarily in Taiwan and South Korea, to be unable to keep up with the demand. To the rising demand and compromised supply of the PS5, we have to add the third element of this equation, the human element. There is always a small amount of the population that can either expect or realize the compromised position of an industry and take advantage of it by means of taking control of the supply of a given good. An example could be the guys that were reselling toilet paper on eBay at the peak of the stockpiling madness of 2020. Another example are the individuals who did the exact same things with the PS5. Either a way of the compromised state of Sony's supply, or for tertiary objectives such as tens of thousands of PS5s being used to mine Bitcoin, yes, this is a thing, these mad buyers caused a further decline in the number of available consoles. A few of these individuals were, of course, more than happy to sell their consoles, only at a markup of over 500% of their original price, sometimes even more. They were called by many names: second-hand sellers, independent resellers, assholes, but we will use the term scalpers. The sheer role that scalpers played in the further obliteration of the PS5's release strategy cannot be overstated. The reality of pricing elastic goods could be seen by customers by being pushed to purchase those consoles at extreme markups due to the sometimes literally inexistent first-hand supply. Sony was, reportedly, so angry at the sad state of the release of their crown jewel that they decided to extend their PlayStation Direct program to sell consoles directly to consumers in Asia and Europe, instead of losing market share to scalpers. The collapse of the PS5 is a fascinating example of just how fragile the commerce pillars of a globalized economy can crumble. The black swan nature of the 2020 events that compromised the entire ecosystem of trade among nations affected pretty much every industry. But the more complex a product generally is, the more room for specialization that it is in manufacturing. Technological marvels like modern computers, smartphones, and consoles are products of hundreds and sometimes thousands of suppliers, manufacturers and assemblers across many nations performing their job perfectly. Modern supply chains are like an enormous capitalist orchestra, where the failing of a single violin or a trumpet can cause the debacle of the whole symphony, which can quickly turn into a cacophony of unhappy customers, filthy rich scalpers, and dissatisfied shareholders. I personally don't blame Sony too harshly. The impact of the pandemic was known by very few, and the extent to which it might grind the production of components to a halt was unprecedented, so very few could prepare for it. I want to believe that Sony did not want to make the PS5 seem like a collector's item or something like that by limiting supply, since, in many ways, that increased desire for the console was already there. They were also affected by the situation. Now, let me be clear, I don't expect anyone to cry for a mega corporation, I only wish to make a point. There is a difference, say, between Nintendo voluntarily and continuously limiting the production of new amiibo lines, essentially playing into the hands of scalpers that manage to get the figurines as they hit the shelves, and Sony's entire production line being left in tatters. So, I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching Rebel Economics. If you did enjoy it, please hit the like button and consider subscribing. We have tons of videos regarding the video game industry, like what was the point of Nintendo's Amiibo, or how the Super Mario Bros. Franchise can keep gamers engaged in everything from golf to Mario Party, so go check them out. And thank you once again, and I will see you in the next one.